everybody, welcome back to another episode of Sound Design December. Today we're going to be taking a look at this sound over here. Now this particular sound for some reason reminds me a lot of Tristan. I think I've heard this maybe once or twice in some of his sets before. I have seen him live 2 times this year, and for some reason this sound just really reminds me of those experiences. So I'm going to refer to this sound over here as Tristan Particles. And actually the way that these are made is really easy. As you can see, we have a saw wave over here, which we're FMing with a sine wave. And that is then going through a bandpass filter, which has its filter cutoff controlled by the node on random here. As you can see, that is the only modulation that we have in this patch. And you can see that in terms of the effects, there's not really a lot going on. We have a hyper dimension for some stereo wave, a compressor to make it a little bit more aggressive, and then finally a delay for the trailing effect. As you can imagine, this is a very easy sound to make. So I could just show you how to make it from scratch and then finish the tutorial in maybe 5 minutes. But I think a little bit more interesting would be to show you what you can add to a patch like this to make it a little bit more interesting. So there's a few things to add over here. First of all, we could use the phaser. We saw a trick in episode 2 using the phaser, but it's not what we're going to be using today. So I'm just going to turn down the depth all the way, and I'm going to give it a little bit more feedback, and I will randomly modulate the frequency of the phaser here. Let's turn this down a little bit, and now we get something like this. As you can hear, we get a nice glassy texture to it, and if you want to mix that in with the original sound, you can just use the mix over here. So you can add it as a nice detail effect here. You could even potentially automate this and maybe even sometimes the feedback a little bit higher so that you get an even more intense sound. But that is the first thing that you can add. Now, as I mentioned before in episode 2, we also used the trick with the phaser. There we went for a more bubbly sound. And in that video, I also hinted that you could do something very similar with the flanger. Now, I'm not going to use this flanger over here. What I'm actually going to do is use the filter. If we go into the filter over here, we actually have these flanges category here. This kind of stuff. So let's add a little bit of resonance, which is going to function like the feedback. We can add a little bit of drive to get a little bit of saturation out of there as well. And then again, what we can do is we can set up a node on random here. Let's make sure that this is a little bit lower. And then for a bubbly sound, we again are going to use the noise oscillator. So let's draw in a different shape for it here. What I want to do is I want to have a little bit of time where it stays at one position and then move down to a different position. So we get this kind of alternating effect between 2 positions, but with a little bit of smoothing in between. So we'll drag that shape into the noise oscillator and then we'll key track it and turn it up. Let's go to 48 semitones for now. Turn the level all the way down and then we can modulate the frequency here. With the noise oscillator, we can go into that noise oscillator and let's turn the modulation down quite far. So let's go maybe 5 modulation here and let's have a listen to how that sounds. We're already getting that bubbly kind of sound, but we're getting a little bit of a different effect out of it. So let's tweak this effect a little bit. Maybe let's go an octave lower on the noise oscillator to 36 semitones. Or maybe one higher. Of course, you can use a different filter as well. Maybe you want to go with the phaser over here. In this case, the reverb filter modulated at 48 semitones seems to do the trick here. We get a nice dark sound out of that. Of course, it can also be nice to add a few longer modulations. We can actually use the phaser for that. Let's keep it unsynced here, and let's remove the modulations that we had before. Let's turn up the depth here so that we get a nice modulation. Another thing that can be interesting is playing with the pitch bend. Since now our pitch is partially determined by this LFO over here, what we can do is make sure that these two oscillators over here are pitching up and down while the noise oscillator isn't. The way that we're going to do that is we're going to set up two modulations. Let's set up a macro for this, here and here. And then I'm going to go up in the master tuning, so that's going to tune all oscillators upwards. So let's type, for example, 48 semitones for 4 octaves. And then over here, what I want to do is I want to do the opposite modulation on the noise oscillator pitch. So here we can go minus 48 semitones. And now these two oscillators should be pitching up because they're not affected by this modulation over here. And this modulation is perfectly cancelling out the master tuning over here. So this noise oscillator is always going to stay in the key that we're originally playing. Just so that we can hear the effect better, I'm going to turn off the phaser over here. And now let's hear what we get from that. Maybe we want to go a little bit more with the modulation. So we can go 72 semitones. And of course over here, minus 72 semitones. Let's add the phaser back in so that you can hear what the phaser does as well here. So as you can hear, we get some interesting different tonalities out of that. Now, just like in my last video, we can use something like my MIDI controller over here to write in an automation for this particular patch. In this case, I'm not going to do that. What I instead want to do is show you something interesting that you can do with these kind of sounds as well. So let's just take a part of the clips over here. What I'm going to do is move that over here. And I'm going to duplicate this over so that we can freeze it. And then we can flatten it. We'll now take this final audio clip that we've made over here and just get the 4 bars over here and consolidate that into a new file. Now, by creating a new MIDI track and loading a sampler, we should be able to drag that file directly into the sampler over here. And then by playing a C3 note, we get something that sounds like this. And the interesting thing that you can do is setting this to loop, turning off the snap, and then decreasing the length over here. Let's go like that, and a little bit of crossfade. I believe the crossfade actually comes from the loop. There we are. So we're just going to get a very small portion here. And now you can create kind of I-whiz effects by loading up something like a LFO. So let's set the LFO to random here. And let's give this, say, 16 notes. We're going to map that to the start parameter here, which is going to determine where in the audio file it is actually playing. So now we get something that sounds like this. What we can do is just add a tiny bit of smoothing. Let's go with 3% here. See if that works. Not really. So let's go maybe with 1% here. I just wanted to slightly glide from position to position. Okay, now we seem to get a nice and glitchy sound. So let's add a delay to that to finalize the sound. And that's the final tip that I want to show you in this video. Now remember that the first patch, the serum patch that we just made, is going to be available up on my Patreon page. So if you're interested in using the patch yourself and you don't want to build it from scratch, make sure that you go check out my Patreon page, which is an awesome way to support the channel. Another way to support the channel is by watching some more of my content, so I'll leave 2 videos up on the screen for you to choose from. So just pick one and enjoy, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.